Hello everyone, and welcome to the Earth Machine Guide to the deck I fondly refer to as MIT, standing for Machina Infinitrack Trains. This is one of my favorite decks ever, and probably the first deck I actually spent a significant amount of time learning. While I hope that you find this guide and profile educational and perennial, I understand that there are several deck profiles for this strategy throughout YouTube and elsewhere. However, I spent a significant amount of time optimizing the deck, specifically the non-engine utility cards. The engine pieces basically build themselves, but the utility cards are all so close in terms of overall effectiveness on average, but so different in terms of what they do. So it's very difficult deciding what to include. In addition to my usual method of creating a guide, I've also included an all-new format for breaking down the role of cards in a deck, as well as describing the often confusing mechanic chain blocking with respect to this deck. To start with a little background on this deck, while a couple cards like Machina Fortress have been around since the early 2010s, this deck is a relatively modern innovation, receiving the bulk of its support in 2019 with the release of Infinitracks, and through the next 2 years via the release of things like the Machina Structure deck, additional trains, Infinitrack support, and Ancient Gear support. Pretty much everything the deck could ask for, the deck really grew in strength. When VFD, otherwise known as True King of All Calamities, was still at large, this was just a VFD turbo deck, almost entirely consisting of Infinitracks. But upon VFD being banned, thank the Lord, this deck had to lean a little more into its inherent strengths and became the beautiful, glorious hybrid it is today. The innovator of this strategy was Aerosol TCG, who developed the basic one-card combo for this deck when Eternity Code is released, and the deck could then have 12 one-card starters as opposed to 3, with the addition of Heavy Forward and Machina Metal Cruncher. Today, this deck is a rogue to tier 2 strategy that can even compete with some of the best meta decks out there. This deck's playstyle is truly unique, especially amongst tier 2 strategies. Its signature one-card starters, an extremely potent grind game with clearly defined strengths and weaknesses differentiate it from virtually every other Yu-Gi-Oh deck. The deck can grind, it has some combos, provides interruptions, and has going first and going second in-engine options. A consistent theme you'll find in this deck is that it has a clear strength that you want to play around or use, but it can adapt and improvise if that strength is either not useful or impossible to use. The deck also has an extremely high skill ceiling as well, making it extremely rewarding to learn as well as master. If you've played Hearthstone and enjoyed decks like Handlock or Control Warrior circa 2015, this is the Yu-Gi-Oh deck for you. The strengths are the following. Note that these strengths are not any subjective reasons, but purely objective facts. It has an extremely strong grind game, with a disgusting recursion loop of resources. It has 12 one-card starters, and a few more 2-card starters, meaning it's super consistent. It has 3, it has very powerful and ubiquitous destruction effects that are either effective at destroying monsters or even back row. There are about 10 quote-unquote open deck slots that the deck builder can build however they want. Either synergistic cards to mesh with the deck, or specific text or hand traps to counter the opponent and show up vulnerabilities in the engine pieces. It also has a great resilience to destruction effects, meaning that it can recover very well from effects like that. Other cards in the opening hand outside of the one-card starters are actually very useful for extension or survival the vast majority of the time, unlike a lot of other combo decks in which the cards that you draw aside from your starters, are just bricks. Now the weaknesses are the following. First, it's hurt by virtually every hand trap in the game, from the really brutal ones against this deck like Droll and Lockbird and Nibiru, to the still somewhat punishing ones like Effect Veiler, Ash, Infinite Impermanence, Artifact Lancia, and Dimension Shifter. You can play somewhat around and through them, but they still impact you all the same. Second, there are not many guaranteed interruptions that you can make on your opening board, though you can get several. Third, the one-card starters take up your normal summon, meaning extension beyond those, if they're negated or destroyed, can be tricky, though not impossible if you draw correctly. Fourth, your pure monster negation, or more like your opponent's pure monster negation, can stop this deck most of the time, as your spells simply enable you to find your monsters that will then be negated, and the traps operate on their own, so cards like Appaloosa can be very challenging to overcome without the correct setup. Lastly, there are very few methods of interruption in Engine outside of pure destruction. Negation, banishment, non-targeted destruction all need to be teched outside of the core Earth Machine archetypes if you want them in the deck. Note that while the weaknesses I listed may seem pretty bad, there is also a caveat for each one. The deck is like a flexible learning beast, great at certain things and adaptable to others via its utility deck slots. It's like the robot from The Incredibles. It's a learning robot. The deck is moderately difficult to learn, and while the large clunky machines may seem brutish and simple once you get the hang of them, there is a certain elegance and flow to playing this deck. I attribute it to its combos using the same general pieces, but being performable in several different orders and permutations, each of which is more or less resilient to specific interruptions. And due to your fantastic graveyard setup, each turn feels different and allows you to extend in insane ways. This makes the deck incredibly rewarding, fun, and difficult to master, as the vast majority of games you lose you can come out of them feeling that you could have done something different to improve your chances of winning. To overview the structure of the video, we'll start with the quick deck profile, then expand into the full deck profile, next display the macro roles of cards in the deck, then go into 6 different unique combos, then go into all the other cards that couldn't make it into the deck, which is like a section that kind of describes potential side deck options, as I don't provide a side deck list because I believe side decks should always be personally made based on your local environment. And lastly, a few concluding thoughts. With that being said, let's move on to the quick deck profile. Now let's get into the full deck profile, and we'll start off with our Infinitracks, that are the heart and soul of the deck, and provide the majority of the starters and the recursion engine. We start off with 3 Infinitrack Brutal Dozer, which are the absolute core of the deck, and one of the 2 cards that really make the deck tick. Its first ability is one that all of the level 5 Infinitracks have, which is that you can tribute an Earth Machine monster and special summon the Brutal Dozer in defense position. However, its second effect enables you not just to exchange one card for another, like via its summoning effect, but also to bring on another level 5 Infinitrack, or any Infinitrack, but typically you want a level 5, which can make your rank 5 River Stormer, and then that level 5 that you special summon with Brutal Dozer that you can detach off of River Stormer can also have a graveyard effect, meaning that this card, while on paper being a +1, getting out your extra Infinitrack monster, is what enables you to get your plus a lot more. Therefore, this is one of the prime areas that many players will hand trap you. Thus, all you need to get this card running is a single Earth Machine card on the field, and this card in your hand, which is easily achievable through our 12 1-card starters. You actually wish that you could run this at 2 or 1, because while almost all of your 1-card starters search this card itself is not a starter, as it cannot special summon itself, and thus can be a brick in the hand if you draw it and don't have a normal summonable monster to tribute. But we do need 3 so that we can search it via our Machina Metal Cruncher. And hard drawing a copy can help you in the cases that A, you have an extender of sorts like Infinitrack Anchor Drill in your hand, or B, you can bait a hand trap on a 1-card starter you do have in your hand, And then you actually already have this card in your hand, so it didn't matter that you got hand trapped on your 1-card starter. Next, we're going to talk about 3 Infinitrack Harvester. This is one of your 12 1-card starters, 3 copies, and therefore end of story you need 3, as you want to see this card as often as possible in your opening hand. But besides that, this card can search any Infinitrack, has a neat level manipulation effect that can, in conjunction with your Machina Fortress, get you up to your rank 9 plays, or in conjunction with your trains, get you into a raw AA Zeus. So this card is a real flexible card in this deck. And of course, just like every monster in the main deck, this is an Earth Machine, so it synergizes with your Infinitracks, Ancient Gears, Machinas, and Trains. Next, we run 2 Infinitrack Trencher. Infinitrack Trencher is your main graveyard extender in the Infinitrack package, and thus is typically the card that you summon most of the time off of Brutal Dozer. It doesn't matter that Brutal Dozer negates its effects, because all its relevant effects are in the graveyard, once it's on the field, that is, in which area its effects are no longer negated. This card banishes itself to special summon back any Infinitrack monster, and unlike your Anger Knuckle, Urgent Schedule, or Brutal Dozer, who have similar effects, the card it summons back does not have its effects negated, such as your Anchor Drill or Harvester. The reason we run this as a 2 of instead of a 1 or a 3 is because although you never want to draw this card, you will almost always use it turn 1 off of Brutal Dozer, and once it's banished, you won't have access to Machina Overdrive's Banishment Recycle effect. You will generally want a second one, turn 2, to extend your place further, and you will most likely use your Brutal Dozer to get out this card again if you don't use your Ancient Gear box. So this is, the second copy is generally Garnet, but you really want it in your deck so you can find it turn 2+. However, that second copy is optional, so if you feel it's a little too bricky, you can of course drop it. In addition, this card actually isn't horrible to hard draw in the event that you do get hand trapped on one of your 1-card starters. You can then tribute that monster to special summon the Trencher from the hand, then link off the Trencher into a Goliath, then use Trencher's effect to resurrect one of your Infinitracks, hopefully it was your Harvester as your 1-card starter, enabling you to have one more Earth Machine than you just did, and that allows you to link into your Ancient Gear Ballista or Anger Knuckle, whichever you want next, basically making this a kind of pseudo-extender when hard drawn. Of course, note that this card is 500 attack exactly, so it can be searched by Ancient Gearbox. Next, we want to run our 1 powerhouse copy of Infinitrack Tunneler. Now, Infinitrack Tunneler is your big boy value machine. It is the same core effect as Trencher and Brutal Dozer in that it can special summon itself from the hand, but it's also a searchable Pot of Avarice when it's in your graveyard. This card is generally what makes it desirable for the remaining non-engine cards in your deck to be interruptions in the form of hand traps or trap cards, as the playstyle of this deck turn 1 is typically to combo off, make a big old pile of Infinitracks in your graveyard, then finishing by using this card, hoping that you draw into your interruptions so you can end on 2 or more back row cards. You only need 1 of this card though, because unlike Trencher, who has a use of its hard draw, this card at best can just get itself in the graveyard, but doesn't supply any inherent extension, so it's a really bad brick. And you might be saying, well, that doesn't sound too bad because then you can use its effect, but the problem is if you were in a situation where you needed this card as a form of extension because you were hand trapped or interrupted, you often don't have sufficient monsters in your graveyard to use its effect. Typically, turn 2, you want to get down to the business of OTKing your opponent, so this card isn't quite as useful for doing that. Note that this card is not like Pot of Avarice, in that you don't actually have to shuffle all 5 back into your deck. So, you do have to target 5 monsters, so there must be at least 5 in your graveyard when you activate the card, but if you get DD Crowed or something like that after activating it, you still shuffle the remaining non-DD Crowed cards and draw 2. I mean, apparently them in the card text implies minimum 1 or something instead of all 5. Classic Konami language. With this in mind, a little trick you can do is to target 5 monsters, including one of your rank 10s, like Bullet Train, But then you can use your Anger Knuckles effect to summon back the Bullet Train by chaining the Anger Knuckle effect to the activation of Tunneler, thus special summoning the Bullet Train before it is shuffled back into the deck, thus only shuffling back 4 monsters but giving you the card draw still, and special summoning your level 10 monster to your field. Also note that this card too has 500 attack, so it can be searched by Ancient Gearbox, and typically is the card you do search with Ancient Gearbox. Next, we run 2 Infinitrack Anchor Drill, which is the first kind of contentious ratio that we're playing in this deck. Now this card is generally played at 1 in the majority of lists, but I am running it at 2 because it has several qualities that help the deck immensely and fit my personal playstyle. It has 2 effects, the first of which is to special summon another Earth Machine monster from the hand in defensive position when this card is normal or special summoned. This effect is super generous, as not only can you special summon cards other than your Infinitracks, such as Machina Metal Cruncher and such, but you can also trigger this effect if it's, say, special summoned from the graveyard via Infinitrack Trencher. The second effect is identical to Infinitrack Harvester in that it combines the level of 2 monsters together, basically, and can help you get into your rank 9 plays with your other level 5 Infinitracks, or to get into a Dingirsu when paired with Ancient Gearbox, which are 2 cards you will often see very often turn 2 due to your 1-card combo path. Now there are several reasons I play 2 of this card instead of 1 or 3. I'll start off for why I don't play 3, and that's because I don't ever want to see 2 copies of this card in my hand at the same time, as the other copy is basically dead, as Anchor Drill cannot special summon itself from the hand with its own effect. Remember, if you have 2 copies of a card in your deck, the probability of drawing both copies in your opening hand is a 1.3% chance, whereas if you have 3, that chance basically triples to 3.6%. I also don't play 3 because while this card has several advantages, it doesn't actually start your engine in of itself, meaning you need another card in your hand to get into your Brutal Dozer. However, I definitely think it's worth playing 2. One reason I think it's worth playing 2 is because this card can help you play around hand traps. Say you have this card in any of your 1-card starters, and use this card to get out something like your any of your 1-card starters or your Brutal Dozer. Then, if your opponent hand traps Brutal Dozer and negates its effects or something, so say you use it, you get use it to summon itself in Harvester, then you get the Brutal Dozer to your hand, tribute the Harvester to bring on Brutal Dozer, they hand trap the Brutal Dozer. Even if you don't have additional extension in your hand, and you normally be in a really bad spot if you just had that Dozer on the field that got hand trapped, like Ashed, you can use your Anchor Drill and Dozer to make a Phantom Fortress Enterblathnir and rip a card from the opponent's hand, which, while not always the best, is still way better than sitting on a raw Dozer. Or if you wanted, you could just go in straight into the Ancient Gear Ballista. At any point in the combo, whether it be with your Dozer, River Stormer, or Ballista, if you start off with your Anchor Drill, if they Ash or Effect Fail or Imperm you, this card can help you salvage your plays and not be a sitting duck by extending further. Basically, this card paired with any starter gives you extra immunity to hand traps, and this card without your starters in hand can help salvage your plays. Turn 2 plus, this is one of the best cards to see, as it helps you utilize your hand's full power and easily get into Earth Slicer or Dingirsu. And it's not just good as an insurance policy. Even if you don't get hand trapped in your standard combo, you would normally have to use Trencher to full combo into Anger Knuckle, but you really don't want to use your Trencher turn 1, as the Infinitrack that you special summon using Trencher often has its effects already used that turn, so you don't get Trencher's full value. This way, you can save your Trencher by using your Anchor Drill instead, and thus that Trencher can be better used on the following turn. Therefore, I think it's a good idea to have 2 Anchor Drill in the deck, as it serves both as an extender and a pseudo hand starter / salvager. Also note it is 500 defense, so it's searchable via Ancient Gear Box. Next and lastly on the Infinitrack list, we play 3 Heavy Forward. Of course, Heavy Forward is your second of your 1-card starters. This card's primary effect is simply to search one of your Infinitrack monsters and add it to your hand. this means you can search Harvester, and that's why it's one of your 1-card starters, as Harvester in of itself is one of your 1-card starters. Its secondary effect, which enables you to either switch a monster's position or to attach itself to an XC's machine you control, is definitely useful in certain niche situations, but generally not that important. It's just a really nice additional effect. Just be very careful if you're trying to bait out hand traps with this card and you have Machina Metal Cruncher in hand, as Metal Cruncher requires you to have no cards on the field to normal summon itself without tributing, and this card does stick on the field. So now, let's get into the Machinas. I know it might be actually pronounced Machina, but I just love saying the word Machina, so that's what they're going to be called. These Machinas represent the remaining 6 of the 12 1-card starters, and the sheer quality of their cards is insane on paper. So we start off with Machina Metal Cruncher. Metal Cruncher is a card that, on normal or special summon, you can reveal 3 Earth Machine monsters from your deck, then your opponent chooses one randomly, and that monster is added to your hand. In addition, you can normal summon this level 9 monster without tributing if you control no other cards, meaning that it is one of your 1-card starters, as you can reveal 3 Brutal Dozers from your deck, therefore your opponent has to choose one to add to your hand, and then you can tribute the Metal Cruncher to get your Brutal Dozers going and get into your main combo line. But if you already have Brutal Dozer in your hand or something, this card is much more flexible than, say, your Harvester, as you can reveal all 3 of your level 10 trains, and therefore ensure you get into a Dora at the end of your turn. So this card is extremely powerful in the deck. Next, we play 1 Machina Fortress. Now, on paper, this is an extremely powerful card, and it's one of the oldest cards in the deck, actually, in terms of date of release, in that it can recur itself over and over from the hand and graveyard. It also is a decent standalone card that punishes the opponent for targeting with card effects or destroying it by battle. So like Trencher, you really only need 1 as a target for your Machina redeployment. But unlike Trencher, who is most likely banished and unusable post turn 1, Fortress can be recurred over and over, as none of its effects are hard once per turn, or actually once per turn whatsoever. In addition, you may be concerned about your Machina redeployments being dead cards if you get out your Fortress and your Citadel from the deck. And what I mean by this is I'm addressing the fact that oftentimes you see 2 of this card in a lot of lists. But in practice, the idea that you draw into multiple Machina redeployments and don't have targets is very, very rare. Because say you draw into 2 redeployments, well then you can actually just play the other redeployment on the redeployment. So you can discard a redeployment for a redeployment, allowing you to add your general Machina cards, including Overdrive. So basically, you don't really have to worry about running out of Machinas in the deck, as Fortress is a really good card at 1. I was playing it at 2 forever, but I tried putting it 1, I didn't see any side effects, and playing it and it basically meant that I get a more useful utility interruption most of the time. Next, we play 1 Machina Citadel. This is our big boy Citadel. Just like Fortress, this card looks absolutely bonkers on paper, as it can come back virtually every turn, not just when your opponent tries to break your board, but also when you ignite your own board with cards like Torrential Tribute or Machina Overdrive, or even in a pinch, your Earth Slicer or Heavy Freight Dairy Crane can actually trigger this card's graveyard effect to special summon itself back to your field. Its other effect that enables it to tribute or target a monster you control and then destroy it and deal damage to all opponent's monsters with attack less than or equal to that monster's original attack, can basically, at the very least, act as a Raigeki to all monsters with 3,000 attack or below if you tribute itself. Or, even better, you can tribute something like, say, your Super Express Bullet Train, which will then do the exact same thing, and you'll get Bullet Train's effect in the graveyard. As I mentioned, it is rank 10 as well, a level 10 monster, meaning that you can get a little fancy and use it in some of your OTK train plays if need be. Overall, this card is really disgusting, and You really want to see it in your graveyard, and it is extremely hard to get rid of. But it is a brick when hard drawn, and it is a hard once per turn effect on its effects, so you'd much prefer that you search it via Machina Redeployment, as this plus Machina Fortress or Anger Knuckle is so good, as you have an instant way to get it into the graveyard. Therefore, it's a very potent one of in the deck. Next, we play 3 Machina Redeployment. This card is probably the single most powerful card in your opening hand, as this card can search your Metal Cruncher, which we already established is one of your 1-card starters again in Dozer, but they can also search a card in conjunction, whether it be your Citadel you want to see, an Overdrive if you happen to have another Machina card in your hand to discard, or you can get into Fortress, and as we'll see in our combo section, just drawing Redeployment can get us into a more powerful play than our standard 1-card combo. In addition, as we already briefly mentioned, if you discard a Machina card, you don't just have to add a Machina monster to your hand, you can get any Machina card, so you can get your Machina Overdrive as well, which is probably the best trap card in your deck. Therefore, this card is 100% the 3 of in the deck. And lastly, in the Machina package, we play 2 Machina Overdrive. Once again, somewhat of a controversial ratio, as most lists run 3, and this is one of your big power cards in the deck, as it has 2 extremely potent effects. First, it can destroy one of your machines in order to get out any Machina in your deck, which is super versatile for several reasons. You can get out your Metal Cruncher, and that can give you a nice search and resources. Or you can get out your Citadel straight away and get that Raigeki quick effect. Secondly, it can also do a lot of good by destroying a monster. It can trigger your Citadel's graveyard effect if your Citadel's already in your graveyard. Or it can also place your Super Express Bullet Train back into the graveyard, thus giving you its effect in the end phase. If you try to destroy a monster affected by Super Dora, or equipped with a Infinitrack Goliath as material, that monster will be unaffected, effectively giving you a free special summon from the deck. Its second effect is what makes the recursion in this deck go from good to utterly disgusting. By shuffling banished machines, you can reuse your Tunneler, Trencher, and monsters banished by your opponent, and thus get your Tunneler and Trencher effects again in future turns. On top of that, you get a nice little card draw. With all these powerful effects, then why only include 2 in the deck? Well, while many lists have 3, the problem with 3 is that this card can become dead if your opponent, say, kaijus your Earth Machine or something. So it is reliant on you having monsters on your field, meaning that it's not always good. In addition, you can only activate 1 of these effects per turn, so this card is even clunkier than most if you get 2 in your hand at the same time. In addition, it is searchable via your Machina Redeployment and Trap Trick, so you don't need the hard draw to see it. Lastly, this card isn't imperative to make your combos work, so you don't need to get into it from many matchups. Thus, for me, this card feels a lot like Infinitrack Anchor Drill, a searchable, fantastic, powerful extender that's not necessary to make your combos tick, but really helps if you see it. Next, let's talk about the train cards, whose primary purpose is to OTK, but can also represent half of the recursion theme of the deck. So we start off with 1 Super Express Bullet Train. Despite sounding like the kind of name I would have given a card when I was 7, this card is no joke. On paper, it looks pretty ridiculous, and in practice, well, it's still pretty insane. As long as all you have on your field is Earth Machines, this card is a free level 10 on your side of the field with no summoning restrictions post-summon. This means that this card can even fix broken hands in certain cases, though we mainly want to search it via your Infinitrack Riverstormer. Secondly, if this card is in your graveyard in the end phase because it was sent there this turn from anywhere, whether it's detached from an Xyz monster, discarded from your hand, or destroyed on your field, or just sent straight from the deck, you can add 1 Earth Machine type monster from your graveyard to your hand. It does have the slight drawback in that it can't attack without destroying your own field, but you rarely want to attack with this card anyways, and generally use it as an extender. These effects are crazy. Even without the second effect to add back from your graveyard to your hand, you would probably still play this card. This card is your Anger Knuckle's best friend, and Anger Knuckle and Bullet Train are a slippery pair of value machines. The reason we only include this as a one of is because this is the card that you generally search off River Stormer, which you try to make your first turn every game. And having more than one of this card is in your hand is useless, as you would always rather see its counterpart, Dairy Crane. In addition, it can't summon itself, so it can't get itself on the field without getting another Earth Machine on the field first, so it is prone to breaking if you draw a lot of them in your hand. Also, certain hand traps like Nibiru really mess this card up, as it can quickly go from being a smooth extender to a fat brick in the hand. You could play 2 if you want, and I think there is definitely a case to, but I just don't see any particular reason why you would want to, as the one copy is recyclable, easily searchable, hard once per turn, and can make bad hands worse. But I definitely think this is something that you can experiment with, as I've seen a lot of lists lately trying out 2 and finding a lot of success with it. Now, onto the topic of trains that I do play 2 of, is your Heavy Freight Dairy Crane. Dairy Crane is another level 10 extender that can be special summoned from your hand if you normal or special summoned another Earth Machine to your side of the field, but its attack and defense are halved, thus giving you another way to get into your big rank 10 OTKing train monsters. In addition, this card is the really kind of random but great second effect in that if it is detached from an XD's monster and sent to the graveyard to activate its effect, you can then pop a card from anywhere. This card also has the unique ability to chain block. Now, chain blocking is a rather complicated subject that I'll do my best to explain here. And if you already understand this mechanic, then you can go ahead and click the end of this timestamp in the description. This topic is a bit hairy, especially if you're unfamiliar with it, so if you're ever confused by something I'm saying, Google is your best friend. Basically, chain blocking is a player-named mechanic in Yu-Gi-Oh! That enables a player to, quote-unquote, block an opponent's conditional, quote-unquote, when effect by hiding that effect your opponent wants to respond to higher up in the chain links with your card that is doing the blocking. So, whoa, that's a lot of words. So first let's consider an example that might help clarify. Say you have your Dairy Crane and a Harvester in your hand. You normal summon the Harvester, and you suspect that your opponent will try to Ash Blossom your Harvester's effect. So you choose the chain block using Dairy Crane's effect to special summon itself, and thus your opponent cannot activate their Ash Blossom. You use Dairy Crane to chain block the Ash Blossom for the Harvester. So how does the summon of Dairy Crane make it so Ash cannot activate? It's due to 2 rules that aren't necessarily intuitive. How we resolve simultaneous effects into a chain, and how quote-unquote when effects can be activated. On the normal summon of Harvester, we have 2 triggered effects that can be activated. Dairy Crane's effect to special summon itself, and Harvester's effect to add an Infinitrack from deck to hand, both of which are in response to the summon of Harvester. Now, there are 2 simultaneous effects that we want to activate, the ones we just said, and now we can put them in any order that we wish on the chain, as is the case with simultaneous trigger effects. So, in order to chain block, we will now put Harvester's effect, Chainlink 1, and Dairy Crane's effect, Chainlink 2. So this means that, our Harvester effect will activate first, then Dairy Crane will activate second, meaning that Dairy Crane will resolve first and Harvester will resolve second. Now at this point you might be saying, okay, well that's all well and good, but Ash Blossom should still be able to just tack onto the chain after Dairy Crane and negate the Harvester effect, right? However, this is not the case, and this leads us to our second principle of why chain blocking does what it does. Following Yu-Gi-Oh! Rules requires college level logic and linguistics. So here's the critical point in wordings of cards like Ash Blossom. Cards whose conditions start with a quote when can only be activated as the next immediate chain link after the event that meets that condition. So for example, in this case, Ash Blossom can only be activated on the very next immediate chain link after the effect that it would be able to respond to, which is in this case your Infinitrack Harvester. However, if you cannot activate them, then they quote unquote miss timing and cannot be activated in the response to that to another event. So note cards with a quote unquote if or each time in the name, in the description of the card's effect, do not follow this rule and simply take place of the next available chain. Now this difference in terminology is why Ash Blossom can be blocked by Dairy Crane here, whereas a card like Effect Veiler can't, because the Ash Blossom is effectively blocked in the chain by the Dairy Crane as it needed to respond immediately to Harvester, but because we had two simultaneous events, we were able to put the Dairy Crane after the Harvester's effect, therefore enabling the, disabling the Ash Blossom from working. Therefore, Ash Blossom cannot respond here, and we can resolve Harvester's effect like we would want to. Basically, in summary, chain blocking certain hand traps and similar effects is a powerful mechanic that this card can abuse, and one of the primary reasons we include two of instead of just the one, like your Super Express Bullet Train. In addition, we often want to find that second copy turn 2 or 3, as its pop effect is very useful in those situations, and that pop effect is actually not a once per turn. Lastly, in the train package, we play 2 Urgent Schedule. Though not officially a train card really, it does have trains in the picture, so I'm putting it in this section. This card is yet another that seems absolutely crazy on paper. Basically, if your opponent ever gets more monsters than you do, you can get 1 Earth Machine level 4 or lower and 1 level 5 or higher, both of their effects of which are negated, onto your side of the field in defense position. This is utterly broken and bonkers, as you can not only get out your Machina Citadel or Super Express Bullet Train and disincentivize your opponent from attacking you and giving you value, but you can also get another littler monster to act as blocking. Even if this card gets popped before you can activate it, it still has the insurance policy that allows you to add a level 10 monster to your hand that, frankly, I don't even understand why it was needed on this card, but it's great for us. It does lock you into attacking with machine monsters for the rest of the turn, but that restriction is trivial in this deck. This card is also more powerful than even meets the eye in terms of its activation requirement. There are some dirty, nasty interactions that are diamonds in the rough and not commonly known. For example, say you have 2 monsters on your field, and your opponent has 2, but you have Urgent Schedule and a Brutal Dozer in hand. You activate Brutal Dozer's effect, and therefore tributing a monster, but that enables you to actually chain your Urgent Schedule to the activation of Brutal Dozer, who tributed a monster for cost, because now you have 1 monster and your opponent has 2, enabling you to actually activate Urgent Schedule in conjunction with your Brutal Dozer. If your opponent, say, summons a monster when you have Torrential Tribute on your side of the field, and say they have more monsters than you can actually start your chain with Urgent Schedule, then chain Torrential Tribute to it, meaning that the Torrential Tribute will resolve first, and that your 2 monsters summoned off of Urgent Schedule will actually live, avoiding your Torrential Tribute. The reason we only include 2 of this is because it doesn't get us directly into our engine on turn 1, and it is a hard once per turn, and if your opponent is careful, they can play around it. Still, this is a great card that you're happy to see almost every time you do see it. Next, we'll talk about the Ancient Gear cards. We'll start off, and there's really only one, so we'll only just briefly talk about our friend Ancient Gearbox. This is the card that you add to your hand off of Ancient Gear Ballista, and then search your Infinitrack Tunneler, Trencher, or Anchor Drill to your hand. This is the worst brick to see in your opening hand, so we obviously only include 1. But as Yugi says, our deck has no bricks. That may not be the quote, but it is true here. For real, if you do draw it, there is still a combo path that enables you to shuffle it back into your deck and make an Ancient Gear Ballista afterwards to get your searches. Also, in a pinch, this card can be normal summoned, so it can actually save your hands in very odd situations in which you open up this card and Brutal Dozer, but no other normal summonable monsters. This card along with the card it adds, it can also make great fodder to special summon your Fortress, or be discard fodder for your Anger Knuckle. So this card is extremely powerful as a value machine, especially adding back to your hand from the graveyard via your Super Express Bullet Train. Now we'll talk about our utility cards. These are the cards that you want to see off your Infinitrack Tunneler draws. And since you have one card starters, you also want to see these in your starting hand mostly, as you almost always want to see one or two of these to complement those one card starters. Literally all of these cards I've selected in the section are of personal preference. So whether you prefer hand traps, traps, or extenders, Crossout Designator and Friends, Ash Blossom, and Imperial Order being some great alternative options to the hand traps, to the normal trap lineup that I like, you can choose whatever you like. Also note that the lineup I chose obviously only applies to a blind game one. Once you are pretty certain of whether you're going first or second based on the result of the game and the deck your opponent is playing, you can, and most likely should, drastically change this lineup. For example, if you won game 1 against Drytron, then you should switch out pretty much all of your traps except for Overdrive for hand traps like Droll, Knockbird, Ash, etc., as the Drytron player will want to go first game 2, and you will have to try and not let them combo off. There are several schools of thought concerning the choice of what utility cards to play. However, these schools are based off of several facts. On an opening hand, assuming about 10 utility card spots available in the deck, we'll have about 1+ interruptions drawn on average, as the chance of drawing exactly one utility card in your opening hand is about 40%, and the chance of drawing one or more is about 80%. After your combo, however, your one card combo, you will draw into 2 more cards once the deck is thinned, which is the unique part of this deck. Not many decks have this kind of guaranteed in-engine draw. The chance of these draws, of these 2 draws drawing exactly one interruption is about 40%, and the chance of drawing one or more is about 50%. This means that overall you will have drawn about 2 interruptions on average available to play once you've completed your one card combo. Now let's solidify this discussion by defining 2 basic schools of thought on this: hand trap lineup or trap lineup, as these are the 2 main types of cards you can play in your utility spots. Yes, you can play board breaking cards like Forbidden Droplet if you want, or you can put in extra extenders like Revolving Switchyard, but these hand traps or normal traps are the 2 types of cards you generally see filling these last 10 spots in the deck. The advantages of hand traps are, of course, that primarily if you go second, they are far better than normal traps, as you can activate them on your opponent's turn, whereas trap cards can obviously only really activate on your opponent's second turn. Your hand traps are also less vulnerable to certain types of removal, like Lightning Storm and Twin Twisters. Normal traps, on the other hand, are better when going first, as you can set up more high-impact cards. Hand traps going first can of course still interrupt the opponent, but are more at risk of being run over and just played through. Normal traps are also less vulnerable against other kinds of responses, such as Call by the Grave, the new Crossout Designator, and Triple Tactics talents. Note that both hand traps and normal traps can function even when going in their suboptimal turns. Hand traps can still negate things when going first. Normal traps oftentimes escape the attention of your opponent's board of negations, even on your opponent's second turn. A hybrid mix of the 2 is also an option, in which you play about half and half to try and get the benefit of both, though this of course still runs into issues depending on how you draw. Basically, to make a correct decision, you have to closely examine the metagame, and which decks are wanting to go first versus second, and what kinds of counter interruption they are main decking. I personally like a trap-heavy lineup, as I would like to believe that the natural synergy between our trap choices and our engine pieces gives them the edge over hand traps in overall efficacy, but there's no true one right answer. We start with 1 Called by the Grave. Look, this deck hates hand traps. Virtually every hand trap has some effect against this deck, so you really like seeing this card in your opening hand to counteract Ash Blossom, Droll Knockbird, Artifact Lancia, DD Crow, Schoolmaster Ghostbell, and more. You want to go first, that you can go second, so Called by the Grave is rather important. In addition, this deck lacks banishment effects for the most part, so this can help disrupt your opponent's graveyard in ways that your in-engine pieces cannot. Next, we choose to play 3 Torrential Tribute. Anyone who has seen my previous guides on Spriggans knows how much I like this card, especially when there's inherent synergy in the deck. This card is synergistic with the deck for several reasons. First, it can trigger your Machina Citadel's graveyard effect. Second, it can send your Super Express Bullet Train to the graveyard to get its end phase effect, which itself can be easily accessed via your Anger Knuckle. Third, your Superdora can make itself or another card immune to the effects of Torrential Tribute. Fourth, your Infinitrack Goliaths, when attached to an Xyz like AA Zeus, protect that Xyz from card destruction. Fifth, Dingirsu can also protect your cards from this effect. Overall, this is an awesome effect that can be a bit of overkill with your Machina Citadel doing basically the same thing, but the synergies are just too nice to pass up. Also, this card can be a standalone card in case you brick really hard, and can be effective even if you can't get your Earth Machines on the board, which is really the reason I love it in this deck. Next, we play 3 Infinite Impermanence. We now draw from our light-hearted brothers in Cyberland to give us a hand in disrupting combo decks. This is the one hand trap we play in the deck, and I think it fits super well, as it can be a hand trap should you have to go second, or a clutch interruption if you go first as well. I believe in the principle of playing lots of the same variety of cards, as in all traps or all monster hand traps, while you can be punished by cards like Lightning Storm and Harpy's Feather Duster. I find that most decks allocate their negates to counter several different sources of disruption, so they might have a counter spell trap and 2 monster negates. But if you have 3 trap cards, then 2 of them will go through, as they will only be able to negate 1 of your trap cards. But if you had, say, a hand trap and 2 trap cards, then you would have only let 1 of your interruptions go through. This isn't a hard fast rule, of course, but typically game 1, I find this is the case. In addition, using Infinite Impermanence instead of a hand trap means their Call by the Grave will be dead on their opening turn. This card might seem slightly weak on paper, but I find that it's very effective to out some of Earth Machine's most brutal counters, for example, Appaloosa. Next, we get into some of the spiciness, which is our 2 Ice Dragon's Prison. This card is super well designed and has several functions, not just as a non-targeted banish effect, but also as a DD Crow of sorts. As I mentioned earlier, this deck lacks the capability to banish, or at least do anything but destroy, opponents' monsters, making this a great out to things like Dragoon. I only include 2 of this in the deck, because it is a hard once per turn, unlike the other 2 previous cards that we include 3 of, and you can run out of targets in your opponent's graveyards, so getting 2 of these in your hand really isn't very great. In today's Yu-Gi-Oh!, so many decks are monotypal in that they are primarily composed of the same type, so Ice Dragon's Prison is almost always live. Super meta decks like Virtual World are all psychics, and some still popular decks like Emancipator, Cyber Dragon, etc. are also this way. Even decks that aren't monotypal, such as Tri-Brigade and Drytron, will still have a limited number of types, thus meaning Ice Dragon's Prison is almost always live. Lastly, we play 1 Trap Trick. Trap Trick, while used in this deck in the past in some lists, has been dropped by a lot of good lists. However, in this particular deck list, featuring 4 other unique normal traps, each with different abilities and utility, this card is actually quite strong and is, in my opinion, the perfect card to tie it all together. Its main feature is that it most of the time serves as an extra copy of your Machina Overdrive without actually having to run that 3rd Overdrive that could potentially be a brick if hard drawn with another, or not having a target on the field. You don't care 95% of the time about banishing the other Overdrive, as 1 Overdrive is almost always sufficient to power your recursion through to win the game. The same logic in terms of banishing applies to the Ice Dragon's Prison, Basically, for these 2 of trap cards, if you draw one of them in your trap trick, you don't really care that you can't find the other via trap trick, as they are hard ones to return effects and you would only want one anyways. On the other hand, if you draw the trap trick and you don't draw them, you can still find them. For your 3 ofs, if you draw one of them in your trap trick, you still have 2 copies in your deck that you can find via trap trick. And of course, if you draw a trap trick and not one of them, you can of course find that card. Trap trick also thins your deck of trap cards, which is actually useful most of the time. The logic here is that turn 1 you want to draw your starters, end of turn 1 off of Tunneler you want to draw into your trap cards and interruptions, and then turn 2 you go back again to wanting to draw your extenders and Infinitracks in order to AFK. So trap trick actually helps you draw into those extenders turn 2 if you activate this on your opponent's turn 1 by thinning your deck of your trap cards. Note the trap trick is basically an exact copy of all your traps, except Torrential Tribute, who is slightly worse in that you can't activate trap trick after a summon, get Torrential, and then activate Torrential. If, however, there is an effect that will summon a monster in the resolution, you can chain trap trick to that effect and get Torrential, and thus the monster will be summoned, allowing you to 2 Torrential. Also note the trap trick's restriction only lets you activate 1 more trap card once the trap card resolves is perfectly okay, as you can often chain your cards to avoid this. You can only include 1 of these in your deck, in my opinion, as drawing more than 1 is really bad, as not only is the second copy dead for at least a turn, but that second copy will also have less targets to find when it is activated. In short, this card is very strong in my particular list, but not necessarily as good in other lists with a different lineup of interruptions. Lastly, we'll now get into our extra deck. These monsters are either your 1-card combo value machines, or your OTK tools and power plays. Note that the vast majority of these cards are 1-ofs, as they either have built-in recycling mechanics, or are only used turn 1 or turn 2 onwards. Also, worst comes to worst, if you need to use them again, you can shuffle them back into the extra deck with your Tunneler or your Machina Overdrive. We start, of course, with our 1 Infinitrack Riverstormer. Basically, this is the second core card of the deck, along with Brutal Dozer, that makes the deck tick. This card allows you to search any monster in your deck. Need your second level 10 to make Super Dora? Add your Dairy Crane. Need your standard value engine? Add a Bullet Train. Need an extender? You can add anything you want. The other reason this card is so potent is because its second main effect allows you to special summon itself back from the graveyard on turn 2 and onwards by tributing a machine link monster. This is better than it might initially appear if you don't understand its interaction, because if you tribute your Infinitrack Goliath, which requires only 1 non-link Infinitrack monster to make, the Goliath can then attach itself back on the Riverstormer, meaning that Riverstormer will have an Xyz material with which it can do a search. This basically means that any Infinitrack turn 2 plus equals a Riverstormer plus a search. As a quick aside, this ruling seemed rule, I guess, seemed very unintuitive to me that a Goliath should be able to attach itself back onto a Riverstormer, because I didn't really understand how if effects worked. After all, a Riverstormer tributes the monster, then special summons itself. The Goliath shouldn't be able to target any monster, because when Riverstormer tributes the Goliath and the Riverstormer are both in the graveyard. However, this again comes down to how trigger effects work in Yu-Gi-Oh! Basically, trigger effects will always start a new chain, and can trigger off of any effects. Well, trigger effects are spell speed 1. Will always start a new chain, and can trigger off of any effects that occurred in the last chain, if they are if effects. So basically, Riverstormer would activate, resolve, and then Goliath could check its condition, would check out, i.e., that it was tributed to special summon a Earth Machine monster, and then it could target the Riverstormer, which is now on the field because it resolved, and then it could attach itself to the Riverstormer. I was serious earlier when I said you need some serious linguistics and logic skills to understand the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! Also note that while you generally want to add a card to your hand with this effect, if you're hit with Droll Knockbird, you can send that card to the graveyard, and often sending your Bullet Train or Machina Citadel to the graveyard is nearly as good as adding it to the hand. Despite its importance in the deck, we only need 1 of these in the extra deck, because we can summon it over and over with this, with its effect to special summon itself back from the graveyard. And this naturally brings us to our 3 Infinitrack Goliath. Goliath is the card we were just talking about, and it has 3 main uses. First, it is used as fodder for your Infinitrack Tunneler to shuffle back into the extra deck. In your 1-card combo, you will often find yourself making 2 or 3 Goliaths that will all be shuffled back into the extra deck, so you can leave the cards that you want to leave in your graveyard, like River Stormer and Super Express Bullet Train. Second, it is used turn 2+ for the interaction we just described, in which we contribute it to get either back out a River Stormer or an Earth Slicer, then attach itself to those cards, giving us a search or a pop, respectively. Third, it can be used to provide extra protection to already potent monsters like AA Zeus. If it is XZ's material for a machine-type monster, that machine monster cannot be destroyed by card effects. As you can see, that would make AA Zeus really brutal, because getting over a 3k beat stick that's not able to be destroyed by card effects is pretty difficult. Next, we play 1 Infinitrack Earth Slicer. Earth Slicer is a great turn 2+ card that can pop several cards on the opponent's field, and then attack as a 3100 beat stick. It's not a very complex card, but it is certainly efficient at clearing a board, and Infinitrack Goliath is a great tool for summoning it back from the graveyard. Like River Stormer, it is the effect that if it destroys a monster by battle, it can attach that monster destroyed by battle as material, which in of itself isn't the most useful ability in the world a lot of times, but it's thematically kind of cool, as the Earth Slicer is running over, slicing something up, destroying the monster, and then absorbing it as fuel to keep slicing over more. Now getting into the trains, we play 1 number 81 Super Dreadnought Rail Cannon Super Dora. Once again, I don't know who made these cards, but they really seem to have taken the names I was making when I was 8. This is a super underrated card, though, that is extremely hard for a lot of decks to get over. It is a whopping 4,000 defense, making it impossible for most decks to beat over, and it can make itself or another monster unaffected by card effects until the end of the turn, which is one of the best defensive abilities in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! This card also, very importantly, can proactively activate its effect on both your and your opponent's turn, meaning you can detach your Express Bullet Train on your turn to get its graveyard, that Express Bullet Train's graveyard effect, then detach Dairy Crane on your opponent's turn to pop a card. Also, getting those cards back in the graveyard, your level 10 trains that is, that made the Super Dora, is important, so your Anger Knuckle can revive them back again, especially the Bullet Train. This is the card that you almost always want to go into turn 1 if you can. Next, we play our 1 Super Dreadnought Rail Cannon Gustav Max. This is a component of your OTK. Turn 2+, you will hopefully make this card with your 2 rank 10s, detach a material, preferably Dairy Crane to pop, then deal 2,000 to their life points, and immediately make this into a Super Dreadnought Rail Cannon Juggernaut Lieb. This guy is the big daddy of the deck, and is the way that you actually win most games. He can be summoned simply by using a rank 10 Machine XC's monster, like your other 2 trains are. He can also detach a material to gain 2,000 attack permanently, but if you activate this effect, you can only attack with this card the turn you activate that effect. He also has the passive effect that he can attack monsters X+1 times, where X is the number of materials on the card. So, if your opponent has 2 or 3 monsters and you've made Gustav Max and hit them for 2k, you can beat over their monsters to OTK with your 6k beat stick. If your opponent has no monsters, you can also straight OTK with your 6k beat stick, as they will already have taken the 2k from your Gustav Max. Next, we play 2 Double-Headed Anger Knuckle. This Link monster is your typical end monster on your opening turn, as it can give you this really crazy value loop between itself, Express Bullet Train, and your cards in your graveyard, especially Ancient Gearbox. On initial glance, it might seem a little weirdly lackluster, especially since it can't be used as link material, but it synergizes so incredibly well with the deck, as it can enable your rank 10 plays, putting cards that you want into your graveyard. Its quick effect to special summon back a level 10 monster from your graveyard is especially potent, as you will always find your Express Bullet Train off of your Riverstormer and sending it to the graveyard in your opening combo, and then being able to special summon it and get back. That, of course, is a super great way to then re-proc that Bullet Train effect. This is especially good if you need fodder for your Machina Overdrive or the like, as you can send something that you actually want in the graveyard, like Ancient Gearbox, from your hand to the graveyard to special summon back Bullet Train, then activate Overdrive, destroying Bullet Train and getting out a Machina monster from your deck. Then, during the end phase, your Bullet Train can add back your box to your hand, which can find you another monster with 500 attack or defense. Anger Knuckle's second effect is pretty handy for getting it out later, especially as a cheap way to get a monster that can be tributed to special summon your Dozer on turn 2. But note that you can only use one of its effects per turn, so you can't revive it and then use its level 10 revival effect. This is the reason that we include 2 in the extra deck, so that turn 2 we can get another fresh Anger Knuckle out to revive a level 10 and try to OTK. Next, we play 1 Ancient Gear Ballista. This card is your Ancient Gear Box Locator 3000, and is simply included for that purpose. It is also great fodder to shuffle back into your extra deck with your Tunneler. Also, quick note, if you have a not very useful spell and trap card, such as your Heavy Forward, you can make your Ballista's second effect to destroy that Heavy Forward, and make one of your opponent's monsters tissue paper for your Juggernaut Lieb to smash over. Next, we play 1 Divine Arsenal AA Zeus Sky Thunder. This card is a staple in pretty much every XZ's heavy deck, but in this one especially it has some wonderful synergy. First, you can attach multiple Infinitrack Goliaths to it in order to give it not only more materials, but also protection from destruction effects. Secondly, you can also hard make this card using 2 level 12 monsters by using a Harvester and a level 10, like your Super Express Bullet Train, which is actually kind of crazy if you think about it. Basically, this card is super powerful in this deck, as you can make it very easily, but you must be wary that you can't summon it after you've resolved your Brutal Dozer, as it is a light monster. Next, we play 1 Phantom Fortress Enterblathnir. On the subject of cards that you can't special summon once you've resolved your Brutal Dozer, let's talk about Enterblathnir. This card is basically in the deck because we often make a rank 9 XZ's we can often make a rank 9 XZ's play turn 1, but making your Earth Slicer isn't especially good, as turn 1 when your opponent has no cards, it's a sitting duck that doesn't do anything but look intimidating. This card, however, enables you to rip a card from their hand, which is much better. Also, there's a combo path if you draw it correctly that enables you to make this card before your Brutal Dozer resolves, enabling you to do your 1-card combo and make this card. Next, we play 1 Cleafort Genius. Now, this is the weakest card in the extra deck and can definitely be removed for other options, but I think it does have merit in this deck, as it can protect itself from spell trap effects and link monster effects, which is a rather unique effect in this deck. In addition, it can negate monster effects, which is something else this deck doesn't do very well. Its last ability has synergy with Urgent Schedule, as you can add one of your level 10s to your hand that can be made quickly into a rank 10 with the level 10 you got out of your deck with Urgent Schedule. Its immunity to spell trap effects can, like Dora, enable you to use your Torrential Tribute or your Machina Overdrive without fear of destroying the Cleafort Genius. And lastly, we play 1 Dingirsu, the Orchestra of the Evening Star. This is the last card in the deck that you cannot special summon once you resolved your Brutal Dozer, but oh boy is this one a doozy as well. Its non-targeted Send effect is super potent for removing cards that your ubiquitous destruction effects cannot, and its protection effects can help protect you from things like Torrential Tribute, or even your own Citadel or Overdrive, and of course your opponent's effects. This card is easily made turn 2 when you have Ancient Gearbox and Infinitrack Anchor Drill in your hand, which is fairly common, as your 1-card combo can enable you to find both of these cards. And that's it for the deck list. I know this is an extremely long description, but I hope this gives some insight into the kind of cards you can play in this deck, and my personal take on why they're good. Now, we're going to talk about the importance and replaceability of cards in the Earth Machine strategy. The purpose of this section is to describe the function of cards within the deck as a whole. So for example, we're going to be talking about why certain cards are in the deck and the general role that they play so that you're better informed when you're trying to change the deck and you know what to take out and what kind of role those cards will play. So to start with, we're going to start from the most important cards to the least important cards, starting off with the core cards. The purpose of these cards is to generate you the actual advantage that you want. And without any one of these cards, the deck would effectively cease to exist, as these cards provide you that core advantage. These cards, of course, are your Infinitrack Riverstormer and your Infinitrack Brutal Dozer. Infinitrack Riverstormer allows you to access any level Earth Machine monster from your deck, meaning that you can access your trains, your Infinitracks, or your Machina cards. Your Brutal Dozer enables you to actually +1 onto the field, as you can then get out an additional level 5 monster that not only will have a graveyard effect, but will also allow you to get into your Riverstormer. Thus, these are the core and heart and soul of the deck, and without these, the deck would not exist. Next are the starters of the deck. The purpose of these cards is that any one of them can get you fully into your engine. Without any one of these cards, the deck would experience an extreme loss of consistency. Without all of these cards, the deck would also not exist. Now these cards, of course, are from your Infinitrack package, being the Heavy Forward and the Infinitrack Harvester, and from your Machina package, the Machina Metal Cruncher and the Machina Redeployment. Moving on, the next cards we're going to talk about are the engine components and the power. So these are cards that are either part of your core 1-card combo in the deck, or part of your tools that actually enable you to win the game via OTKing. So while the deck can function without these cards somewhat, they're actually still very important to the deck. And if you lost one of them, the deck would severely be hurt, and its consistency, durability, or power would be reduced. So these cards, starting with the Infinitracks, are Infinitrack Trencher, your first copy, Infinitrack Tunneler, and Infinitrack Goliath. Next, you have your Ancient Gearbox and your Ancient Gear Ballista that also participate in the main 1-card combo. Your Machina Citadel and Machina Overdrive, which are your significant power cards in the deck that provide a large bulk of your power, durability, and recyclability. And lastly, your entire train package, featuring your 3 Train XZs that give you your OTK potential, your Express Bullet Train and Heavy Freight Dairy Crane, which give you your extendability and some recyclability, and of course your double-headed Anger Knuckle, which finishes off your main 1-card combo. 1 copy. Lastly are the least important cards in the deck, which are your utility cards. Now don't get me wrong, these cards can still be the stars of the show on any given turn, but they aren't necessarily essential for making the deck function. They just help increase the power of the deck, but they are the most replaceable cards in the deck. So starting off, you have your Machina Fortress and Infinitrack Anchor Drill, your Urchin Schedule, and your second copies of both your Trencher and your Dairy Crane. All of these cards are extremely powerful cards in the right situation and can be extremely strong extenders, but they aren't needed to get into your main 1-card combo or to OTK your opponent at all times. They're simply very nice to have. Next, you have your utility spell and trap cards, such as your Called by the Grave, Infinite Impermanence, Torrential Tribute, Ice Dragon's Prison, and Trap Trick. All of these cards give the deck an additional power boost, and you want to see them with your 1-card starters, but they aren't necessary and are easily replaceable for other cards, such as Forbidden Droplet or Solemn Strike. Lastly, you have your extra deck complements, such as your Enterblathnir, Dingirsu, Zeus, your Earth Slicer, Cleaver Genius, and your second copy of Anger Knuckle, all of which are extremely powerful cards in the right situation, but aren't always necessary in every game state to really finish off games. All of these cards are great in the right situation, but they aren't needed in the main one-card combo, so they're all potential options to replace in the future, while still maintaining the core identity of the deck. Overall, we break this into our 4 sections of core value, starters, engine components and power, and utility, and I hope that these sections really illuminate the varying degrees of importance and function in the deck. Alright, now we're going to get into our combos, starting off with our very basic one-card combo. This combo only requires one of your one-card starters, and as many of our combos require that, we're going to start off with different one-card starters. In this one, we'll use our Infinitrack Harvester. To start, we simply normal summon our Infinitrack Harvester, activate its effect to add an Infinitrack from deck to hand. This is our deck on the side. That will allow us to go ahead and add our Brutal Dozer to hand. Then we will go ahead and tribute our Harvester for cost to special summon our Brutal Dozer to the field. Our Brutal Dozer's effect will then activate, allowing us to get another Infinitrack monster from the deck, and we will choose our Infinitrack Trencher. Next, we will go ahead and Xyz summon with these two in order to get our Infinitrack Riverstormer. We'll now activate Riverstormer's effect, detaching a Trencher. It doesn't matter really which, but we will attach the Trencher to go ahead and add to our hand a Super Express Bullet Train. Now, we'll be able to activate Bullet Train's effect to special summon it to the field, because we do have an Earth Machine, and all we have are Earth Machines. Now, as you may have recalled from earlier in this video, we want to be acquiring Infinitrack Goliaths, our Link monster, while we go through this, so that when we eventually end up on our Tunneler, we can shuffle back mainly Goliaths and leave useful things like our Super Express Bullet Train in the graveyard. However, we do not Goliath on our Harvester or Goliath before this, so that we can play around Nibiru. As you can see, we've summoned 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and the 5th summon is Bullet Train. If we had made even one Goliath before this, the 5th summon would have occurred before Bullet Train, allowing our opponent to Nibiru, and thus making it so that our our Bullet Train would not have been able to go on the field, because we would have had a rock monster on our side of the field, and not just Earth. So now we will start using our Goliaths. We will now Link summon Goliath over the Riverstormer. And now we will go ahead and Link summon the Bullet Train and Goliath into our Ancient Gear Ballista. Right. Now, Ballista's effect will activate, allowing us to add an Ancient Gear monster from deck to hand, of which we have only one, our Ancient Gear Box. Then Ancient Gear Box's effect will activate, allowing us to add an Earth Machine with 500 attack or defense, and we will now add our Tunneler. Now, if we had gotten Tunneler before off of the Brutal Dozer, then we would have added the Trencher here, but we want both Tunneler and Trencher in our graveyard eventually. Now, we go ahead and we use these two cards to... We first activate our Infinitrack Trencher, banishing it for cost to special summon an Infinitrack monster to our side of the field. And we will special summon our Infinitrack Brutal Dozer. But it could be any Infinitrack, it doesn't really matter. Now we will then Link summon off this card for another Goliath. Note we got a point with the ballista to this one. And now we will go ahead, and now we'll do something maybe that seems a little strange, but we will tribute the Goliath for the Tunneler. And now we will go ahead and link off for our final Infinitrack Goliath with this Tunneler. Now we will go ahead and link some of these two off into our double-headed Anger Knuckle. So, now we will go ahead and activate Tunneler's effect. Now you may be wondering at this point, why didn't we just discard Tunneler with Anger Knuckles effect, and that way we could have actually saved the card in our hand. We wouldn't have had to, use this. Well, actually we want to keep this Super Expressive Bullet Train in our graveyard. Because if we keep it in our graveyard, then we're able to get its effect this turn. If we have to special summon it out to send the tunnel to the graveyard, then this wouldn't get its add back to our hand effect. In addition, we actually want to wait until we now activate Tunneler's effect, targeting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 monsters, as these 5 monsters, as once we draw, if we draw into a Dairy Crane, then we can use Anger Knuckles effect to get back out Bullet Train, and then we can actually get the Dairy Crane out and make our Dora. Whereas if we had summoned the Bullet Train before we activated our Tunneler's effect, then our Tunneler would have been unable to, then we wouldn't have had a monster actually to trigger our Dairy Crane's effect and get it out, and we would have been stuck with a Dairy Crane in our hand and a Bullet Train in our field. So now we'll shuffle all these back into the deck. These will go back into our extra deck. This will go back into our main deck, we'll just put it at the bottom for the sake of it, and now we'll get 2 blank cards. So, at the end of our turn, we will then activate Bullet Train's effect from the graveyard, allowing us to add back the Brutal Dozer to hand. Note that when we shuffled into the deck, we chose our 4 links. You always want to choose those. But then we also chose Harvester instead of Brutal Dozer. This is up to personal preference, but I personally prefer choosing Brutal Dozer, as I will generally try to get an add off of box and then get an Anchor Drill in my hand for the next turn. And I just think Brutal Dozer is a little more convenient than Harvester, but you can do whatever you wish. So, at the end of this turn, we spent 1 card in our hand, and now we effectively have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have, a lot of cards in our hand. We have the 4 plus these 4, so we have 8 cards in hand effectively after our turn is ended, which is a lot of cards. So this value machine can keep rumbling onwards, and this is our basic 1-card combo that we end on. We hope that these 2 cards we drew, as well as some of the 4 cards we drew in our hand, are back row cards, and we can hopefully set these 2 to protect ourselves to go into our next turn. This is our basic 1-card combo, and the combo you should really memorize and understand the choke points of, so you can best adapt to it. Now we'll do our Enterblathnir combo, which requires Machina redeployment. Machina redeployment is your best starter in the deck, as it is very flexible and can allow you to go into more than just your Anger Knuckle inboard, like we demonstrated in the last combo. For Machina redeployment, we need the card itself, and then a blank card. It doesn't matter what it is, we're just going to be discarding it. So we'll start off by activating redeployment, and discarding the blank card, and adding from our deck to our hand, a Machina Metal Cruncher, and a Machina Fortress. Now, we will go ahead and normal summon the Machina Metal Cruncher using its summoning effect, and we will display 3 of the Infinitrack Harvesters. We have 3 of them in our deck. Our opponent will then be forced to add 1 of them to our hand, and thus this card will be added to our hand. Then, we will activate Machina Fortress's effect, discarding itself and Harvester to special summon itself. So they will both be sent to the graveyard, and then Fortress will special summon itself. Now, we will be linking off these two big boy monsters, strangely enough, for our Ancient Gear Ballista. Now, this may seem a little strange to link off those big monsters for the Ballista, but believe me, we're headed places here. That Ballista will add our box, and that box will then add, instead of Tunneler this time, our Trencher. And you might see where this is going. We need the Trencher here in order to get our Harvester back out. But how do we get this Trencher in our graveyard? Well, the easy way to do it is simply activate Machina Fortress's summoning effect again, meaning that we can discard these two monsters that equal 9 stars in total to get out Machina Fortress. Now we have Trencher in our graveyard, we can now banish it to get out that Harvester that we added at the beginning. And we haven't activated Harvester's effect yet. So now we can activate it, allowing us its first effect, its primary effect, allowing us to get a Brutal Dozer to hand. Now we can get Harvester and use Harvester's other effect to level modulate Fortress and itself in order to get up to 9 each. And we can overlay these two for Phantom Fortress Enterblathnir. Now we can activate Enterblathnir's effect, allowing us to detach the Fortress in order to banish a card from their hand. And it's very important that you detach the Fortress here, as we will need to summon the Fortress again later in the turn. Note here that we have summoned a grand total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times by now, so we will be susceptible to Nibiru in this combo. So this isn't the combo that you want to do when you have fear of getting hand trapped. Now though, we can start into our normal 1-card combo path. We'll now tribute the Ballista, as that is an Earth Machine, for the Brutal Dozer. And that will allow us to go ahead and get our Tunneler out of the deck. Since we've already used Trencher's effect this turn, we don't want another one. We now can overlay these two, go into our River Stormer, as per usual. River Stormer effect, detach one, it doesn't matter which. And now we want to start, and the card we'll be adding is another Bullet Train. Now you may be saying, this is a misplay. You can't actually summon Bullet Train because we have this wind monster on the field. But you underestimate the power of Fortress. See, now we can use Fortress's effect again, since it was the card we had attached, by discarding this level 10 monster in order to get Fortress back again. We can now link off our River Stormer for a Goliath. Right? Sorry, Goliath. And now, in order to build up our graveyard just a little bit more, we can then use River Stormer's other effect, tributing the Goliath to get it back. Then link it off again for another Goliath. So we're just getting another Goliath in our graveyard. And now we can finally link off these two for our copy of Anger Knuckle. Now we do our normal shenanigans. We go ahead and banish our Tunneler, targeting which 5 cards do we want here. Now let's look. So, of cards we generally want to shuffle back, we don't want to shuffle back our Gearbox mostly, because we want to add it back at some point via our Bullet Train. And of course we don't want our Bullet Train because we want that graveyard effect. We don't want to shuffle back our River Stormer because it can be special summon from the graveyard easily via tributing one of your Goliaths in future turns. And you don't want to have to make it with 2 level 5s again. We also don't want to shuffle back our Fortress, as Fortress can be special summoned from the graveyard easily as well. And wow, what did that leave us? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 monsters that we want to shuffle back into our deck. We'll do so now. And draw 2 blank cards. So now, at the end of our turn, we currently have, we spent 2 cards, so now we are at 5 cards in hand with an Enterblathnir on board, and you've ripped a card from their hand. With these great resources in the graveyard, and of course you can activate the Super Express Bullet Train in the end phase to add back, say, the Fortress to hand. So actually we have 6 cards in hand. We have this value loop in the graveyard with your Anger Knuckle and your Enterblathnir on the field. So this is a great situation to be in, but it is vulnerable to hand traps. Alright, for our third combo, we will be talking about our level 10 train combo. To execute this combo, you can either start out with a Machina redeployment or simply a train in hand. And for the sake of simplicity, we'll start out with the case in which you draw a train in your hand, or one of your level 10 trains, such as Dairy Crane or Bullet Train, as well as a starter. So we'll start off, as per usual, activating Heavy Forward. Heavy Forward will go ahead and give us a Harvester to hand. Normal Summon Harvester will now chain block with our Dairy Crane. Now this is a matter of judgment here. If you think they have Ash, most likely, it's best to chain block with Dairy Crane here. If you think that they have Nibiru, then it can be best to wait until you summon your Bullet Train. But here we'll do it this way. We'll chain block with Dairy Crane. Harvester will then add us our Brutal Dozer to hand. Brutal Dozer will then tribute off the Harvester, special summoning the Trencher from deck. These two will then overlay into River Stormer. River Stormer detach. Add our Bullet Train. Of course, if you drew the Bullet Train instead of the Dairy Crane, you'd add the other one, vice versa. Now, we go ahead and special summon the Bullet Train, link off the River Stormer for a Goliath. Alright, for a Goliath, now go ahead and link summon our good friend Ballista. Ballista, go ahead and add Box. Box, add Tunneler. Now we can go ahead and activate our Trencher and Graveyard. Banishing to special summon back one of our Infinitracks. In this case, we'll simply do our Harvester. Now link off into another Goliath. Alright. Now, instead of special summoning the Tunneler like in the first combo, we don't actually need to put the Tunneler in the graveyard first and resolve it before the Anger Knuckle, since we already have our level 10. So we will simply use River Stormer's effect to tribute the Goliath, the special summon itself back out. Then we will use, then we will get a third and final Goliath. This is why your placement is extremely important. If you had the Dairy Crane here, you wouldn't be able to do this. So we get the Goliath now, our third and final Goliath. And now we go ahead and link these two off into our good friend Anger Knuckle. Anger Knuckle will now use its effect to go ahead and discard our good friend Tunneler in order to get back out Bullet Train. Bullet Train and Dairy Crane will now Xyz summon our Super Dreadnought Rail Cannon Super Dora in defense position. And now we can use our Tunneler effect, banishing itself to target 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 monsters. Shuffle all these back into the deck. These will go over here. This will go into our main deck. And draw 2 blank cards. Now we will activate Dora's effect on our turn. It may seem a little wasteful to use its effect, but we will activate its effect, targeting itself, detaching the Bullet Train. The important thing is that we are detaching Bullet Train here, so that we can then add back, in the end phase, our Brutal Dozer. So as you can see, simply by adding in a Dora or any of your level 10 trains, you can actually get a Super Dora at the end of your... So you effectively spend the card in your hand to get a Super Dora at the end of your turn, which is a really awesome deal. In addition, before you activate Super Dora's effect, which renders it unaffected by card effects, you can also go ahead and attach your heavy forward to it. This will set you up really well for your next turn. As on the next turn, you can of course pop with your Dairy Crane by quick effect activating this when they play something that you want to destroy, and detaching this. And therefore this card is an unaffected 4K defense monster and you get a pop. So really good situation you're in here. And that's the end of this third combo. Alright, now it's time for our disaster case. What if we draw a box combo? As you may have noticed in our previous combos, we really like to add our box to our hand via Ballista to get us some good value. But now we have our box in our hand, and it was added to our hand not by drawing it. Or sorry, by drawing it, so we can't actually use its effect here. But we can still survive. We need a box as well as a starter in our hand. And Infinitrack Harvester is a lot better than Metal Cruncher here, as we will demonstrate shortly. So first, we will start by normal summoning Infinitrack Harvester. That will allow us to add a Brutal Dozer to hand. Now we will link off the Harvester into Goliath, and this is the critical difference between Metal Cruncher and Harvester in this particular case, is that our Harvester allows us to link off here, and this will give us an additional fodder for our Tunneler, which means that we won't have to shuffle back one of our two Infinitracks. But more on this later. Let's keep going for now. We do our normal stuff, tribute Goliath, get out Brutal Dozer. Brutal Dozer will now get out our Tunneler, because we need to get out our Tunneler early on, because we need to shuffle this back into the deck. Now we will go into River Stormer, as per usual. River Stormer will now detach the Tunneler to add Bullet Train the hand. River Stormer will, now we will special summon the Bullet Train. Link off the River Stormer into a Goliath. Now, instead of going into our Ballista, like I'm sure every Earth Machine player has so many times, even if they have box in their hand just out of pure habit, we will now go ahead and XZ summon our Anger Knuckle. Now what Anger Knuckle will do here is it will enable us to discard this box to get back out the Bullet Train. Alright? And now we have something a little tricky here. We want to shuffle back our monsters we got via Tunneler, but we probably want to shuffle back this Anger Knuckle and not our River Stormer. So what we'll do is we'll actually activate River Stormer's effect now, tributing the Anger Knuckle to get itself back out. Now this is good not only because now we don't have to shuffle back the River Stormer, but also this can't be used as link material, and this can be used to now get our Ballista, which will soon have an Ancient Gearbox target in the deck. Now we will go ahead and banish the Tunneler, shuffling back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 monsters, leaving this all-important Brutal Dozer in the deck. Now note if we'd started with that Metal Cruncher, we wouldn't have been able to link off the additional Goliath, meaning this Brutal Dozer also would have had to go back in the deck, which would have been bad, which we'll show momentarily. So all 5 of these go back in the deck. These 3 in the extra deck. And these 2 in the main deck. We'll just put them on. And then we'll draw our 2 blanks. We'll put these 2 on top for now because we'll soon be getting our box back out. And now we will go ahead and link these 2 off into our Ballista. And now our Ballista will go ahead and add our box to our hand. Surprise, the top card. And that will then add our Trencher via the box's effect. Now we will go ahead, tribute the Ballista for the Trencher. Now we will link off the trencher for one of our Goliaths. And now we have that all-important other Infinitrack target in our graveyard, i.e. the Dozer. So now we can banish the trencher to go ahead and get back out the Dozer, which enables us to go into, you guessed it, another Anger Knuckle. And now we're actually into our Anger Knuckle, whereas if we didn't have that additional target here, we would have had to stay on the Ballista or the Trencher. And this is how you solve your box combo. Now you still get your add back in the end phase with your Bullet Train to add back the Brutal Dozer to hand. You have a lot of card draw on hand, and you have your same basic setup here. You just had to do it a little bit wonky in order to get there. But as you can see, our deck still functions perfectly fine, even by drawing when we draw our worst brick. Alright. For the second to last combo, this is going to be our big Kahuna combo that combines all of the lessons we learned in our previous combos. This is kind of a hybrid of our Enterblathnir level 10 train combo. So, we will need a redeployment, and then our Harvester, as well as a blank card to discard for the redeployment. And the Harvester, of course, could be a heavy forward. So we will start off by activating redeployment, by discarding the blank card, adding to our hand our Fortress and our Metal Cruncher. Now we will normal summon Metal Cruncher, and from here on, for a little while, this will be just like our Enterblathnir combo, except that we will be revealing 3 trains instead of the 3 harvesters like in the Enterblathnir combo, because we already have the Harvester. We'll assume we get the most probable result, and we'll add our Dairy Crane to hand, shuffling these 2 back into the deck. Now we will be activating Fortress's effect, discarding itself and Harvester in order to get itself onto the field, so this will be just like the Enterblathnir combo. Now we will go ahead and link off into our Ancient Gear Ballista. Ballista will go ahead and add Box. Box's effect will now trigger, getting us our Trencher. We will now activate Fortress's effect again to summon itself, discarding these 2 that equal 9 stars. Now we will go ahead, banish this Trencher to get back our Harvester onto the field. Harvester's first effect will trigger, enabling us to get ourselves a Brutal Dozer to hand. Now its second effect will activate. We'll activate its second effect, allowing us to level modulate these 2 into 9, which will enable us to make our good friend Enterblathnir. Enterblathnir will now activate, detaching the Fortress specifically. Remember, that's important. Banishing a card from their hand. Now we will activate our Dozer. Note that now once we activate Dozer, we will be locked into Earth Machines for the rest of the turn. This is why we had to do the Enterblathnir first. We will tribute this Ballista, getting out the Tunneler. XZ summon our River Stormer, detach one of them to go ahead and add the other train that you did not add in the first one on the Metal Cruncher reveal, of course, is what I mean. Now, you will go ahead and discard the Bullet Train for a Fortress. Note that it's the Bullet Train and not the Dairy Crane. The Dairy Crane is not does not need to have all your monsters be Earth machines like Bullet Train does. So now we will link this River Stormer off into a Goliath. Now Goliath and Fortress will, first. Now we will tribute the Goliath for the River Stormer back again. And now link it off immediately again for another Goliath. Now we will link off these 2 into your favorite Anger Knuckle. Now, in order to get fodder into our hand to discard for Anger Knuckle, we will go ahead and banish our Tunneler, targeting 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 monsters, leaving these very valuable ones in our graveyard. Of course, if this was something that you wanted to shuffle back, you could do that as well. Shuffle these back into the deck. Now we will draw our 2 blank cards off of Tunneler, and hopefully one of these, as well as the 2 other cards that we had in our opening hand, will be able to be discardable to get back out our Bullet Train. Of course, if we don't have one, we could always just, tribute this Anger Knuckle to get back out the Bullet Train. That triggers the Dairy Crane, and now we Xyz summon these 2 into our Dora. Detach the Bullet Train to target Dora itself, and during the end phase we can add back our Fortress. So now we've ripped a card from their hand, we have a pop on their turn, as well as an untargetable 4,000 defense monster, unaffected 4,000 defense monster, and we have 1, 2, we needed to discard 1 for the Anger Knuckle, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4 cards in our hand. 2 of these, plus the 2 cards that we had at the beginning of our turn, for a really great board. And I hope this kind of combines all the ideas of all the other combos into one big combo. Alright, now for this last part of the combo section, we don't necessarily have a combo, but more a description of the follow-up that I like to do on my opponent's turn and my turn too, as I feel like this part of the Earth Machine deck is often overlooked in videos. So, when we're talking about this particular combo path, we're going to assume we start at the end of our basic 1-card combo. This means we have our Infinitrack Tunneler and Trencher banished, we have an Anger Knuckle on the field, we have a Bullet Train and a River Stormer in our graveyard, we have a Box and a Brutal Dozer in our hand. Remember, the Box was added to our hand via the Ballista, and the Brutal Dozer was added by the Bullet Train in the end phase. So, what we're going to do here is we're going to play through and note that we also had 6 other cards in our hand that could potentially be interruptions. So of course now we need to do some guesswork on what our opponent can do. But what we will assume is that we have enough interruptions such that our opponent can clear our board, of course, like the Anger Knuckle, but we can also prevent them from putting up any interruptions against us. Because oftentimes we'll have at least 2 interruptions as back row that will stop them from doing what they want to do. So on our opponent's turn, typically we will activate our Anger Knuckle at some point, discarding the Box to summon back the Bullet Train. Now our opponent will generally destroy both of these monsters at some point, or we will destroy them ourselves with our Torrential Tribute or Machina Overdrive or something like that. So both of these will be destroyed during our opponent's turn. Alright. At the end phase, our Bullet Train will activate again, enabling us to add back a monster from our graveyard, and we will choose our Box. That Box will then add Earth Machine with 500 attack or defense to our hand, and I often like to choose Anchor Drill. Now, we can go ahead on our next turn. We'll assume they have no interruptions, although of course this is somewhat improbable, but we'll assume they have no interruptions here, and we'll show the different plays we can make. With our Anchor Drill, we could go ahead and we could just normal summon it along with the Box, and go ahead and make a Dingirsu. Now, Dingirsu is of course a very potent card here, as now we could simply attack during battle phase, and then whatever happens, we could just detach a material, and note when the Dingirsu enter the field, we could either attach a Trencher or a Tunneler to it, or we could send the monster to the graveyard, and then after this card, after the battle phase, we could then go straight into our AA Zeus. So that is one option. However, backing it up, my preferred pathway, and no, that was just one of many options. Now this is my preferred option. I normal summon Anchor Drill, special summoning the Brutal Dozer, the Brutal Dozer will then trigger, allowing us to get into our additional copy of Infinitrack Trencher with its effects negated, which of course doesn't matter here. Now, I generally like to go ahead, level modulate the Anchor Drill and the Brutal Dozer to go into 9, and overlay into our good friend Infinitrack Earth Slicer. Now, Earth Slicer can then pop 2 cards here. Now, with this Trencher, so this is an option, of course. You do Anchor Drill and the Brutal Dozer, get Earth Slicer, pop 2 cards. A part of the play I also like to do is I now tribute Trencher for a Goliath. Now we tribute the Goliath to get back out the River Stormer. Now the Goliath will then use its effect to attach itself back onto one of your XCs, and it will attach itself to the River Stormer. The River Stormer's other effect will then activate, detaching the Goliath to add a monster from your deck to your hand. I like to get Dairy Crane here. Now we can use the Earth Slicer and the River Stormer to make our precious Anger Knuckle, but I think you can also just use the Trencher, the other Trencher, to banish itself, get out one of your Infinitrack monsters. Now, link these 2 off into an Anger Knuckle. Alright. Now, discard the box to get back out the Bullet Train. And the Dairy Crane will then trigger when you get the Bullet Train out. And those will go into Gustav Max. Gustav Max will then detach the Dairy Crane, getting the Dairy Crane's pop effect, allowing us to destroy 1 card on the field, and dealing 2k to the opponent's life points. And then it will go into our Juggernaut Lieb. So now at this point, with just our recovery hand of 3 cards, including our Dozer, Drill, and Box, we've gotten into an Earth Slicer, Lieb, and Anger Knuckle. If we want, if they have a lot of attack position monsters, we can potentially OTK with the Lieb by attacking up to, now detaching the Bullet Train, 1-2 times with our 6k monster. Or, if we want to, we can keep the Bullet Train for now and simply attack with these monsters and try to OTK this way. But we've gotten 3 pops on our opponent's turn, as well as this humongous board potentially OTKing them. As you can see, this deck's recovery is extremely good, and you can potentially do this turn after turn, as during the end phase, when you add your Bullet Train to the graveyard again, you can once again return the box to your hand during the end phase and get yourself another Anchor Drill. So this deck has a great way of following up on turns and trying to OTK, and I think this is the most fun part of the deck, is figuring out the neat little puzzles of how to optimize your turns and make them as efficient and powerful and explosive as possible. Now, I want to talk about all the other cards that couldn't make it into the deck. You know, these are cards I couldn't find space for, but they're by no means bad cards, and in a lot of cases, there's a lot of merit to playing them even over cards that did make it into the deck, and based on a meta that could be far better than certain cards that are in the deck. I'm going to start with the cards that would occur first in the deck list, like say your additional engine pieces, and then move through into maybe utility cards and then into extra deck cards. So starting off, let's talk about additional engines. More specifically, the Machina engine extended via Machina Ruin Force. This new boss monster coming out of Burst of Destiny is a super exciting card, as it's a massive, huge boss monster. But in this deck, it just doesn't quite cut the mustard. If it was an Earth Machine that could be special summoned from the graveyard or hand, it would definitely be a one of inclusion in the deck. But as it's a dark monster, it's just too much of a brick in your hand. In addition, its upside isn't even that strong, as once it gets on the field, the vast majority of the time, it's just a giant beatstick, as battle trap cards are pretty rare. So this card, in my opinion, just isn't worth it. I really tried to make it work. I tried very hard, believe me, but it really just is not very good in this deck. Now, the option that is much more viable and is actually very, very close to making it in the deck was the Train package extended, meaning that I would include something like Revolving Switchyard and Flying Pegasus Railroad Stampede. This was very close to making it in the deck, and it offers a different approach to playing the deck than normal, as it would replace some of your more defensive utility cards for what's basically an extender package that acts as more copies of level 10 trains. So let's break down what exactly Revolving Switchyard would look like. Basically means that if you special summon your Super Express Bullet Train or your Dairy Crane, but mainly you'd say your Bullet Train because you would have gotten it off of your River Stormer, then you can basically get a free blank rank 10 and another Earth Machine body on your field if you special summoned your Pegasus off of the Revolving Switchyard. And this means that you would get into your Dora, and you would be able to save your Infinitrack Trencher, as that Pegasus would have given you a blank Earth Machine body to use. So that sounds like a pretty good deal in my book. You get into your Dora, which is a very strong level 1 play that you like to make most of the time, and you get to save your Infinitrack Trencher as extension for the next turn. But once you start looking at it a little closer, you realize it's just very similar to other options in the deck, and it's more a matter of preference. So we can also compare this to, say, including additional copies of Express Bullet Train or Dairy Crane. Including those also means you get into your Dora, and if you get into River Stormer, and it means that you can go ahead and save some bodies, and you can, if you draw an additional copy of Dora, you get that additional Dora pop. So, it's kind of the same as adding more copies of your trains, and this isn't an easy value call. Now, I'm not going to calculate the probabilities of drawing this versus, use cases, because really, there's so many edge cases and such that it's really not worth it, but just know that it's very, very similar to including additional copies of trains, and is more a question of playstyle. Do you want extra extenders, which this kind of would offer, or do you want your more defensive utility cards on the deck like Ice Dragon's Prison? I don't think there's a wrong answer here, but for me, putting this in makes you a little more brick prone, and it means that you also have a slightly higher ceiling. And I, in this deck, generally prefer to lean into its recursive nature, so I prefer to be less brick prone, and therefore I don't choose to play this package. Now let's talk about additional forms of interruption or utility. Basically, for this deck, every staple under the sun is fair game. Every great trap card, hand trap, anti-hand trap, they all pretty much work, though some are better than others. Meaning that it's entirely up to your personal preference and your play style in terms of what utility cards you want to be playing, whether it be for, you're going first build or you're going second build. Solemn Strike is a great card. This deck lacks negation of any sort in its engine, so Solemn Strike kind of fills in that gap. But on the other hand, Solemn Strike also doesn't have any real natural synergy and isn't accessible within the deck. However, it's also very good in that it's self-sufficient, and it can work on its own without reliance on your Earth Machines being on the field. Next up is Solemn Judgment, which is very similar to Solemn Strike in a lot of cases. It's basically as good, except while I think Solemn Strike is more of a main deck inclusion, I think Solemn Judgment is a great side deck inclusion, as once your opponent sees all of your back row, you would include Solemn Judgment to protect your back row from back row removal. EMR is a really fantastically themed card, and it hurts me so much not to see it in this deck, as the synergy between it and the revival of Super Express Bullet Train, after you, say, get your Anger Knuckle on the field in your 1-card combo, you then revive back the Bullet Train and send it via EMR, will give you a fat 3-pop, and that would also give your Bullet Train its recursion effect in the graveyard. However, this card's crippling weakness is that it's twofold. First, and most importantly, is that if you don't get out your full 1-card combo and you brick somewhat, then, or get hand trapped really bad or something like that, then this card is really bad. As using this on your Ballista or your Anger Knuckle is just a 1 pop and it's quite bad. And if you don't get anything out, it's actually straight up dead. In addition, this card tributes, and it would be much better if it just destroyed, as then you could kind of do some cheesy stuff by attaching, your Infinitrack Goliath to your monsters, and then this wouldn't actually affect them at all, and you would still get the pop effect. So, I wish that it had some other changes, but the card is cool, and you can try it if you want, but in my opinion, it's just not worth it, as it's too much of a brick in certain hands. The next cards that I want to talk about are Crusher Run, Spin Turn, Outrigger Extension, and Chronomaly Chaos Atlantis. So these cards kind of are the inbred Infinitrack Speller Trap cards. And just like EMR, it really sucks that these cards don't make the deck because they're so thematically consistent with the deck, but there's several core problems with them. Now, the general idea's backdrop is that you play 2 or 3 Crusher Run, and then a Spin Turn and an Outrigger Extension as targets for those Crusher Runs when they get destroyed, and then the Chaos Atlantis as the premier target for Outrigger Extension on top of your River Stormer. You could also just cut the Outrigger Extension and the Chaos Atlantis, as the Crusher Run can reuse a Spin Turn from your graveyard, and that's actually the more viable option to use these cards. Now, the package looks like the kind of thing that in the anime would be like super busted. Like, you have the Crusher Run in your field, and it's just like, oh my gosh, we can't do anything. If we destroy their cards, they just destroy ours, and they just have no out to it. But in practice, unfortunately, the card just isn't that hard to play around. Your Crusher Run kind of leans into what the deck's already good at in a bad way, in that it destroys cards, and the deck already destroys a lot of cards. So, if a monster they have is immune to destruction, it's probably still going to be out there, and then Crusher Run doesn't really do anything to it. In addition, if you can't, similar to EMR, if you don't get out a lot of Earth Machine monsters, so you get hand trapped, etc., it's a lose more card. It's a win more card, and it's a lose more card, in that, you have to have Earth Machines out to make it work. And it's not a proactive card, so, they have to be out there. So, unfortunately, this card is just a little bricky, and therefore it can't quite make the deck. Monster Reborn is a great card in the deck, and it enables you to not only have a great turn 2 plus extension option, but also to get your hands rolling if you get hand trapped or something. Say you get hand trapped on your Infinitrack Harvester, and you don't have any extension in your hand, you can just go ahead, link that off into a Goliath, and then go ahead, Monster Reborn the Harvester, and even though you don't get Harvester's effect again, you can just roll ahead into your Ancient Gear Ballista and get much more value than you would have otherwise. However, once again, this card can make bad hands worse, as if you can't get anything into your graveyard, you can't use it. And unfortunately, most of your monsters have hard once per turn effects, so it's not like if you're getting them back, you're going to be able to get their effects if they were negated in the first place. Now let's talk about some spell and trap removal. Harpy's Feather Duster, Twin Twisters, Cosmic Cyclone, all great cards in of themselves, but I think they're more like side deck cards, as a lot of matchups don't even use back row, and this deck already has the ability to destroy back row cards with your Infinitrack Earth Slicer and your pops off of Heavy Freight Dairy Crane. Imperial Order is a fantastic card, and it can be really effective in this deck. And I think it's a great side deck card, but it can get a little inconvenient as you do run a fair amount of spell cards in the deck. However, it does have natural synergy in this deck, in that if you do want to use it, you can actually just dispose of it via your Ancient Gear Ballista or your double-headed Anger Knuckle, which can then allow you to use your spell cards. Skill Drain is a great card in the deck, actually. And even though I said it can shut down the deck in certain instances, which is true because the deck relies primarily on monster effects to actually do anything, the card is actually surprisingly good if played at the correct time, as a lot of your monsters have humongous attack. And this can shut down certain decks really effectively. However, once again, this card can be a little bit like Imperial Order in that it can kind of hinder yourself, so I think this is more like a side deck card. A Crossout Designator package is also an interesting option in this deck. I think it's an aggressive choice that could be good instead of your trap lineup into certain metas, as it not only gives you that nice splash of hand traps, but also gives you a super potent Called by the Grave effectively. However, I think this deck's natural playstyle is to load up on cards that you can draw into at the end of your turn, and then set a bunch of back row, but this package is definitely viable. Now, Ash Blossom and the other zombie hand traps are very strong cards. Everyone knows this, and to be honest, 3 Ash Blossom in place of the Trap Trick and Ice Dragon's Prisons would probably be slightly better, but to be honest, I really hate the zombie hand traps in decks that don't make synergistic thematic sense. And having a little zombie waifu just floating in your deck full of giant intimidating machines, I mean, I'm sorry, man, I just can't accept it. I really want to see some interesting, cool synergy and interactions in the deck, and frankly, Ash Blossom is just so banal to play. In addition, by not playing any monster hand traps, you make their cards like, say, Called by the Grave, or cards like that, unusable turn 1, or even cards like Crossout Designator that might not even have a target in this deck. Just like to mention, though, the reason Ash Blossom is especially strong in this deck is because oftentimes when you eliminate deck's ability to add cards to their hand that extend via their hand, they have to extend by pouring cards from their hand onto the field, in which case your destruction effects can really take hold, like Torrential Tribute, etc. Iris Sword Soul is a really neat card in this deck, as it's easily summonable via having your level 10 revived via your Anger Knuckle with its effects negated. However, the problem with this card, just like others I've mentioned, is that if you don't actually get into Anger Knuckle turn 1, this card is worse. It is a dead card. So Iron Draw is a neat choice in this deck, as turn 1, you almost always end on 2 monsters, and thus can activate this to draw into your additional interruptions, as generally you can end on your 2 monsters that then go into Anger Knuckle, or you end on Anger Knuckle and your Dora. However, after experimenting with this card, it really made me wonder why I just wasn't running the interruptions instead. I mean, the point of Iron Draw is literally to draw into your interruptions, but if you just ran interruptions instead of it, you would actually get more interruptions on average, as you would have a guaranteed 1 interruption, whereas Iron Draw has less than a 50% chance to draw you an interruption. So this card didn't make sense to me when I really thought about it. And in addition, this card is once again dead if you get hand trapped and can't actually get 2 monsters on the field, which once again makes it worse than just actually playing hard interruptions. Gozen Match and Rivalry of the Warlords are of course optimal in this deck. You play only machines, and you virtually only play earth cards. So I think it's a great card, and it falls in the same general category as Called by the Grave. Sorry, it doesn't fall in the same category as Called by the Grave. Its efficacy is really just dependent on what deck you're playing against, so it kind of falls in the same category as back row removal cards. And so while I think it's a great side deck card, or these cards are great side deck cards, I just don't think that they're worthy in the main deck, as a lot of decks actually play around these cards inherently. Triple Tactics Talents is a really great card, and I think this card does fall in the same category as Called by the Grave. And I think it's probably better in the side deck than in the main deck, as the hand traps that really nail this deck aren't generally ones that are played in main decks at the current time that I'm making this video, like Droll and Lockbird and Lancia. So this is better to include when you suspect your opponent has now included those cards into their main deck. Pot of Prosperity is a card that seems splashable in just about any deck, but this is one where I highly advise against it for several reasons. First, Prosperity's primary purpose in a deck is to provide a more consistent draw at the cost of several restrictions. However, this deck is already very consistent with 12 one-card starters, and drawing more than one isn't generally what you want to see. Reason 2, and more importantly, is that if you run Prosperity, you can't draw cards the turn you activate it, and naturally we want to resolve our Tunneler, so Prosperity is a no-go in this deck. Forbidden Chalice, Forbidden Droplet, and Dark Ruler No More are signature board-breaking cards that can be great when you need to go second, and have to go against some big boy combo deck. However, as we plan to go first, I don't think it's worth including these in the main deck. Of course, if you wanted to, you could try, maybe bump up the train numbers a bit and try to go for a more OTK route as a going second deck. I'd also like to point out that Forbidden Droplet in particular can be really powerful in this deck. Not only is there cards that you can hard draw that you want to get into your graveyard, like your Machina Citadel and your Ancient Gearbox and Infinitrack Tunneler and such, but it also has the unique property of being flexible going first or going second. On top of that, its primary downside of discarding cards is mitigated further by the fact that you have great draw power via your Tunneler and Ancient Gearbox. In addition, this pairs great with your main turn 2 power cards like Earth Slicer and Rank 10 Train plus Dairy Crane detached pops, and the Forbidden Droplet kind of turns off monster effects and preps their board like a sous chef. Then your big XZs come in with head chef energy and clean up the mess. So if you want to try more than the 2 Urgent Schedule in the deck that are your turn 2 cards, this is a really great option and should be your first one that you try. Ally of Justice Cycle Reader is a tech option against certain graveyard reliant light decks like Drytron cough cough, and can actually be searched in a variant of the Machina redeployment combo in which you use Gear Gigantex. However, I think this is at best a side deck option, unless you're only playing against a friend who plays Drytron or something. Now, let's talk about some extra deck cards. Gaia Dragon the Thunder Charger is a very common inclusion, generally in place of Cleaford Genius, as this card can be a good OTK tool for on top of your River Stormer, but frankly, I rarely feel the need to use this card. I think it's a great alternative to Cleaford Genius, and I think you should try it out, but the cards perform very different functions, so I think you'll definitely have a preference which one you want. Infinitrack Mountain Smasher is a rank 7 card that can be good in niche situations in which you're trying to OTK turn 2 and have a random level 5 plus Harvester, but this situation is just too niche to be considered, and Mountain Smasher isn't potent enough of a card on its own. Gaia Saber the Mountain Shadow I think is an excellent side deck card, as one of the deck's great annoyances is that if you get restricted in terms of having something like Context C on your side of the board, then you're actually stuck, like perma-stuck. So this card can help alleviate that. Big Eye, just like Mountain Smasher, can be made in pretty niche situations. Generally, you just don't need to go into this card though, and you prefer to allocate your resources elsewhere. And lastly, Gear Gigant X is a card that can work turn 2 with your Anchor Drill plus Box Summon, but if you are in a state when you can make this card instead of Dingirsu, then you're already winning, pretty much, since Dingirsu is usually an out to stuff, and in which case you don't really need it. For this reason, I just never found myself going into this card and always opting for Dingirsu if I was going to summon Anchor Drill plus Box. And that's it for the cards that I chose not to include in the deck. As I mentioned earlier, there are tons that you can think of that I haven't listed here, but these are the main ones that I think you should at least consider trying out in your list of Earth Machine. Hope I've convinced you throughout this video that this deck is not only one of the best designed and enjoyable decks in Yu-Gi-Oh!, just to play as, but also to play against. It has a strong thematic flavor while simultaneously blending and melding some of the best Earth Machine archetypes Yu-Gi-Oh! Has to offer. The deck also won't totally break the bank, as it only costs about $175 for the main and extra deck, which you can also equate to one Forbidden Droplet at this point in time. Recent releases also helped reduce the price of the deck immensely, as Ice Dragon's Prison, Infinite Impermanence, Machina Metal Cruncher, AA Zeus, and Heavy Forward have all had their prices reduced by more than half in the last month alone. While I think the deck is in a great spot as is, if you want to reduce the cost of the deck further to sub $100, you could opt to take out some of your utility cards that aren't necessary to make the deck tick, such as Ice Dragon's Prison, Trap Trick, Infinite Impermanence, and even Urgent Schedule for any spell trap staples you want. Refer to the All the Other Cards section above for suggestions. The deck hasn't received any new support in the last couple months, but I hope that 2022 brings some new, exciting Earth machines that can drive this deck to new heights. There are so many ideas that I have that I think will make this deck crazy. If a level 6 Infinitrack monster came out with a decent effect, or to enable you to get into some better rank 8 or rank 10 plays, or a potent turn 1 rank 9 Earth Machine XCs came out, this deck could really jump to new heights. With all that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to leave any comments or suggestions down below, drop a like, and I hope you have a great day.